Hello, everyone, and welcome to the VIDA podcast, where we help educate military veterans and their spouses on opportunities in Web3. Our plan is to host a series of industry leaders, many of whom are veterans or spouses themselves, so that we can learn about their journey down the crypto rabbit hole while understanding opportunities for transitioning veterans in the industry. I'm Chris Perkins, president of CoinFund. I'm a combat Marine veteran who spent 15 years on Wall Street before transitioning into the crypto space. And before we begin, I would like to thank our sponsor, Luca, who's dedicated their time and resources to make this podcast possible. For our 24th episode, we'll be speaking with U.S. Army veteran JasonHall, co-founder and CEO of METHODIC Capital. Welcome, Jason.
Thank you very much, Chris. Appreciate you having me.
Awesome. Let's start by hearing about your background. Tell us how it all started.
Sure. I think I have a little bit different background maybe than some folks you've had on. I was enlisted. So I actually enlisted while I was in high school. Everybody always asks, why would you do such a thing? I wanted to go to college is the honest answer. And there wasn't an easy path to get there in my family. And there was a bit of military history as well, although it wasn't talked about very much. But, I felt like military gives you really a combination of both the experiences that you gather while you're in, and then the opportunities and experiences that you have after you get out, which is kind of what we're talking about here. So for me, the Army was a path to go to school and to build up some fundamental experiences for my life.
So another way to say it was that you worked for a living as opposed to the officers, right?
It's a different job. It's just a different job. The officers have their own struggles for sure.
Yeah. Now I understand you were a Ford observer. Is that right?
I was 13. Foxtrot was my MOS. I had an opportunity to go to Navy Nuke Power School, but that is not the experience that I wanted. So I turned down a Navy Nuke Power School contract to be a forward observer, which is a lot of people called a move of limited wisdom at the time. I think it worked out okay, but yeah, I came in fully enlisted, combat arms MOS.
I was a Ford observer too. It's a fun job. Any particular like formative moments in the military that shaped you going forward?
Oh, for sure. I can think of two for certain. I mean, I was a very unlikely enlisted man in the Army. I was didn't play sports in high school. I was 6'2", 160 pounds when I went in, which I was teased mercilessly about during basic training. And it was not an easy transition for me into military life for sure. And in basic training, I actually barely made it out. I got injured at the end of basic training. I guess I can talk about this now because a lot of time has gone by, but I actually got orders to a medical platoon after basic training and not to proceed to AIT, Advanced Individual Training. I found my orders and tossed them in the trash and went on to AIT anyway, where I was actually honor graduate when I left. So it ended up okay. But it was definitely a move of kind of taking the bull by the horns a little bit, and definitely kind of a gutsy thing to do. And especially for someone who really had a lot of struggles in basic training, but turning that around and sort of saying I'm not going to fail at this. I'm just going to dig deep and get through this and graduate well. I didn't have to fortunately do that particular thing many more times in my life, but certainly that sort of ethos that was built in that experience was kind of formative for me to just gut it out.
What a cool story, man. So you go on to become honor graduate. And did you have any deployments during your tenure in the Army?
I did. So when I was stationed in Fort Drum, New York, 10th Mountain Division, and I got assigned to 2nd and 22nd Infantry Battalion, and we left shortly after my arrival to Bosnia. So this was in I'm dating myself here, but this was in the mid 90s. So this was the sort of tail end of the war over there. And that was, I mean, I think anybody that was in the military that's done any sort of overseas deployment, almost regardless of what it was, is going to call that a pretty formative experience.
Totally.
For me, it was like yet another culture shock. Having gone from a kid from Fairfield County, Connecticut, into the military, and then from there into Bosnia was a. I mean, honestly, it was a great experience. I think the perspective that you get from a deployment is just really unlike anything you can really get elsewhere. Maybe if you're Doctors Without Borders or something like that, you'll find yourself in situations where you can really sort of get those experiences and see that side of sort of humanity and life and how other people live. But yeah, that was definitely a huge formative experience for me.
Got it. So then you came back home. Eventually, you rotated out of the army. Tell us about that transition. What was it like?
Hard. Yeah. I feel like there's a lot of I've listened to a lot of veteran interviews and things, and it seems like you get two flavors. You get folks that really struggle, unfortunately, when they come out. Could be traumatic brain injury, which is a huge problem. Could be post traumatic stress, et cetera. And it's just folks that really have to process a lot to get back on their feet after military service. And then you have these folks that really have these kind of meteoric careers. Maybe they came out of the soft community, or maybe they were, combat vets and got out and went to Ivy League schools and had sort of great careers. um, my sort of transition out was pretty much in the middle of that. I got out to go to school. September 11th happened shortly after I
Oh
ETS'd,
wow.
and the deployments really started to kick off at the tail end of my 8-year contract. So I was stayed in the National Guard when I got out. I had this weird experience coming out of the military where I was in college. I was struggling to just like be a college student after coming out of the types of experiences that I had in a combat arms unit. There's a variety of sort of struggles I think that are just innate to that experience. And then having September 11th and starting to see the units get called up, right in that 2003, 2004, 2005 time period where I was kind of done and out, and then
Yeah.
having to sort of wrestle with, man, do I go back in? Do I not?
Yeah.
It was actually pretty tough for me to transition out, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, I can imagine you've got that looming in the back of your head. So you went through school, and graduated. Can you walk us through? A lot of times people, a lot of the officers obviously went to school first. So you kind of, as an enlisted man, you went to service and then you went to school, and then bam, you start hitting the job scene. Where did you go from there? Where did your career take you?
Yeah, it was an interesting path. So when I was getting out of school and kind of transitioning to the private sector, I had aspirations of being in finance and investing, getting into financial services. I think pre a lot of the veterans programs that exist now in the banks and things like that. And so it was a pretty difficult transition for me. I actually got very fortunate. I met a guy who was in the process of winding down his fund of funds. He's a very, very successful trader. He was winding that down into a family office, and I was able to sort of come on and be mentored by him as a trader. At the time, he was trading a lot of equity derivatives. And so I was able to kind of work under his tutelage as like a junior trader, just sort of piggybacking on some of his trades and just learning how he reads the market. And I did that actually for quite a while, and it was an incredible experience. It led me to move to a small frontier hedge fund where I worked as an execution trader for a while, and then actually transitioned from there to Bridgewater Associates, which is a large global macro fund. If you're not familiar with it, kind of a famous culture. But that was kind of how I got my toe in, was just as a very junior trader.
How did you find this mentor? How did it happen?
When I was in school, I was still working and going to school at the same time. And I was working actually as a trainer. which was kind of a natural thing to do as a part-time thing when you're fresh out of the military. And so I actually met his wife through my training job, and got sort of very friendly with their family. They're very, very nice people, very sweet people, and I expressed a real interest in what he did, and a willingness to work it out. So it was, again, standing in the right place at the right time, and kind of seizing the right opportunity when it presented itself.
So you go from, effectively shadowing your mentor, eventually takes you to an execution training job, and then you end up at Bridgewater, which is known, as you said, for its culture of radical transparency. I don't know what you can tell us about Bridgewater, because I know they're pretty strict, but like, what was that experience like? And then can you walk through where you went from there?
I mean, I think it was a great experience. I was there for 4.5 years, which in Bridgewater, there's always a joke that it's sort of like dog years. 1 year at Bridgewater, 7 years elsewhere. I don't know if that's actually true, but that's sort of the joke. It was great. I mean, it sort of keeps with this theme throughout my life and career of um, culture shock, or ending up in these like very differentiated situations, which I actually think when you have a background in the military, you sort of get that beaten into you pretty early. And if you learn how to harness that, it's a pretty powerful thing. And so coming into Bridgewater was another example of very, like you said, very unique culture, very transparent, very straightforward, much more academic than you would get in the military. Nobody's yelling at you or anything like that. It's not an aggressive place to work, but it is extremely forthcoming with its feedback. And for me, that wasn't that difficult of a thing. There were other things working there that were quite difficult to get used to, but I think if you spend a period of time in service, you make a lot of mistakes. I mean, that's the reality. And the more challenging an environment you find yourself in the military, the more mistakes you're going to make, and you're going to get called out on them, and you're going to grow to want to be called out on them. And so when you move to a corporate, environment where that's the mode of operating, it's not that foreign. It's certainly different. But I felt pretty well set up for that part of the culture.
Got it. And what was your role there?
Actually started recruiting for their investment teams, and then moved on to a team lead position, and then eventually transferred into the front office. And I worked on the portfolio associate team. Specifically, my job, and I guess this will come up later in this conversation, but specifically, my job was managing the benchmark exposure. So this was your broad sort of beta market exposure, and index replication as well.
How did you get into crypto, Jason?
So I was an early. So the same mentor was, somebody that was always sniffing around new technologies and new asset classes, and turned me on to Bitcoin. This would have been in 2013, I think. So I was a very early Bitcoin miner, not aggressively enough, clearly, but that was my first foray into crypto. I mined Bitcoin for a while, and in those days, Bitcoin did well, but it just sort of scraped along the bottom. It was a long time before we got the big spike,
Yep.
and there wasn't really a career path in crypto at
Yep.
that time. Some people made one and very successfully so, but for me, I was trying to get from a mentee to a trader to into a large hedge fund. And so I really just sort of set crypto aside. And it wasn't until actually not that long ago, around 2021, that I was catching up with a former Bridgewater colleague of mine, who's somebody that I respect greatly as both an investor and just as an intellectual. And he was transitioning out of the buy side to focus full time on a DAO, which to me was sort of a mind-blowing career transition. But we started talking about it, a lot, and that sort of planted the seed for crypto.
Yeah, for those who don't know, a DAO is a decentralized autonomous organization. which that industry has had its ups and downs as well. So you got into Bitcoin, and then you turned back in 21, and like, was there a did you have an epiphany at a certain point? It's like, that's it, like, this is going to be big, and like, what's your overall thesis on crypto?
Yeah, I mean, I think for sure, and it came in the form of due diligence. So I'm kind of I'm a relatively risk averse person for crypto. You meet a lot of very risk seeking people in crypto. I would not count myself as one of those. So it was a lot of me, calling the people that I respected the most in the space, and and even people that were skeptics as well, and just trying to kind of understand how, I had an inroad into DeFi, decentralized finance, and Web3, and the whole, made the Discord rounds and things of that nature, and kind of had a flavor of what was happening on the ground, and then went to the sort of back to my TradFi contacts and said, "Hey, what do you think about this?" And the thing that I kept hearing was, "We love it, but," and that was like the start of every conversation. We love the infrastructure, we love the technology, we love the possibilities, but there's this impediment, or there's this reason why we're not coming in. And this became, for me, like the most enticing problem set ever, because it's like, okay, well, can I solve part of that problem? Everybody's got a but, so there's a barrier that's there, and it's not been solved yet. And so can I get into this problem set and solve it? And I think that's, Web3 has the ability to just globalize and somewhat homogenize the financial services experience across all populations and all, users of financial services, which is all of us. But there's a lot that needs to be built. There's a lot that hasn't been done yet. There's a lot of ambiguity around the regulatory environment. We're kind of writing the rules to the game while we're playing it, and it's a very fast-paced game. So
Yep.
it's a really difficult environment, I think, to operate in certain ways. But that difficulty to me was just super energizing.
So you went on to found and co-found Methodic Capital. What was that decision making process like? To go out on your own to become, an entrepreneur and founder.
Well, I mean, it was something I always wanted to do, but I think one of the benefits of Web3, and one that I really capitalized on, is unlike in traditional finance, if you want to start a hedge fund or an asset management firm, that ground is so well worn at this point, and the barrier to entry is ridiculously high. And the hurdle to which you can actually have impact in a broad sense is very high as well, because there's so many established players. But it was something I always wanted to do, but I'm a pragmatist, and so there was no real sort of TradFi version of me being able to do that. What became, obvious, the more conversations I had with institutions that were interested in Web3 and wanting to come into this space, is that there was a dearth of safe investment vehicles out there to give people, like what I was doing at Bridgewater, which is broad, benchmark, indexed, very precise return streams in crypto, in a way that was as compliant and safe as humanly possible. And that just became sort of the siren call that I couldn't really ignore, because it was the thing I was passionate about, and it was solving a real problem in an industry that I think has real potential.
So can you walk a little bit more specifically then into Methodic Capital? What are you planning to do? What problems are you trying to solve? How are things going? But would love to get an update on how your building is coming.
So methodic capital is, this kind of a current state and a future state way of looking at it. The current state is rolling out a series of passive indexed private funds. These are, low cost, professionally managed, highly compliant funds that allow investors, both on chain, but probably more importantly off chain, to gain investment exposure, asset exposure to DeFi, into the crypto ecosystem. And what that looks like for us initially is the launch of a private ETH staking fund. So for those of you that are not familiar, Ether or the Ethereum network is second largest to Bitcoin, um, but the largest sort of layer one, if you will, DeFi chain, and it is an exposure that's not terribly difficult to get on its own as simply the price of Ether, but it is actually quite difficult to get the reward rate, what could be thought of as the yield of the Ethereum chain, in addition to the price. So the total return of ETH, which would be the price plus the reward rate on top of that. Why it's difficult to get in the problem that we're solving is that a lot of, for US investors in particular, a lot of the centralized exchanges that offer this exposure have come under fire from regulators. Some have been fined, some have gotten the famous Wells notice that goes around from the SEC on occasion when they're looking and really scrutinizing into something. And this has caused a climate where a lot of investors have come off of those platforms. And so we're looking to kind of fill that void by offering that total return to them. In addition, there are certain investors on the sidelines that can't hold crypto on their balance sheet, but they're interested in the space, but they can hold private fund shares. And so this is where the private fund structure again comes into play and sort of offers to bridge that gap. So it'll be a series of funds that will roll out. ETH staking is just the first one of several. And then hopefully in the future, what that becomes is a platform where you have a series of funds that you can invest in, but you also have a shared infrastructure and a shared sort of back and middle office technology layer for emerging managers in the blockchain space that are looking to launch strategies. Launching funds is very expensive. It's very difficult. Tokenized fund shares is a relatively new uh, sort of vehicle, if you will, for private funds. And so we're looking to kind of bring all of that together into a platform in the future.
It's kind of ironic, you started your career as a forward observer, right? Your military career. You're on the frontier. You're on like the tip of the spear, and you're watching, right? And I guess in this case, you're not watching the enemy. You're watching this incredible, like what I like to call the staking economy emerging. So it's almost like it's so ironic that you're again being a forward observer in a way because you're seeing this incredible innovation. You're on the front line, and as an entrepreneur, you're building a pretty important, I think, solution for those institutional clients. I mean, you and I talk about the yield all the time. That Ethereum yield is fascinating. It's material, and if you're making it easy for institutions to achieve that yield, and we think that it probably is going to compete at some point with other yields. It's a really interesting space to be. I mean, academically, I find it incredibly fascinating.
It's it is a fascinating. The thing that makes it so interesting for me is you can look at it. If you talk to an equity person, they're going to call it a dividend rate. If you talk to a fixed income person, they're going to call it, coupon rate or a yield.
Yeah,
And I think everyone's right. But then at the same time, everyone's wrong as well because it's
100%.
kind of none of those things. And it behaves. I think the thing that's so interesting, especially about Ether, by the way, is it behaves unlike other yields. So just the nature of how the interest rate changes based on economic drivers that push that interest rate, it behaves in a diversifying manner. And so that becomes just a very interesting addition to a portfolio. So I guess you and I could geek out on this for a long
I
time,
get
but
excited when we'll lose the listeners. Let's talk about you, Jason, a little bit more. So,
sure.
can you walk through what it's like to be an entrepreneur and like what's a typical day? You're building a business. I mean, I imagine going in 1,000 different directions. What's a typical day like?
A typical day is, the evening before, I have a huge flow chart tracker of everybody doing, their different steps in sort of launching this product. And so it's, we have probably 6 or 7 different partners with different work streams. And when I wake up in the morning, I check all the things that went wrong while I was asleep. And then I spend 3/4 of my day trying to fix, all of the problems that occurred. And I think it's just it's kind of the fog of war is kind of an overused analogy, I think. But then at the same time, the best laid plans, we have everything kind of laid out, and your job or my job just becomes a lot of problem solving, which I actually really enjoy. But that really becomes just a huge component. It changes depending on where we are in the launch cycle. Right now, we're very, very close to launch. And so it's just a lot of pressure. It's a lot of, follow-ups and tasks and whatnot. But yeah, my day is just a lot of unblocking. One of the things that as a forward observer, you've heard the term force multiplier before. I look at my role as a CEO and a co-founder as an enablement function or a full force multiplier function, not as the end all be all of everything that's happening. So we have trusted. I've trusted co-founders who are very experienced and very smart. We have trusted partners that are working very hard. And so my job is really just to make sure that they can be as successful as possible so that we can all be successful. And ultimately, I think doing all of that with and being able to kind of abstract out of it and make sure that we're faced in the right directions and that we're upholding the kind of basic principles on which this entire project is founded, which is to do things with a high degree of precision, to do things extremely compliantly, to be as sort of forward looking from a regulatory and fiduciary responsibility perspective as possible, and to be able to stay nimble and do things that frankly haven't really been done before, but uphold sort of all of those basic values. And that becomes, enough of a job for me and probably a couple of other people.
That's great. What advice would you give to a veteran trying to break into the space?
Well, I would start off with I think this is a great space for veterans. So, and here's why. If you think about, I mean, let's assume that this sort of hypothetical person is interested in either technology or financial services, whether it's asset management or trading or what have you. If you look at those traditional industries, whether it's big tech or finance, there's really well-worn paths there. You kind of go to certain schools, have certain majors, get certain jobs, get a master's, et cetera. And a lot of veterans have these kind of existential conversations when they're transitioning or just afterwards of where do I fit in? How do I have impact? How do I map my experiences from the military onto the private sector and have impact? And there's certainly avenues to do that and successful ways of doing that in traditional industries. But you are, there's no getting away from the fact that you are non-traditional in your background when
Yep.
you do that. In Web3, there's really no notion of a traditional background. So there's no like the well-worn paths there are not worn yet, and so what you find is an incredibly like heterogeneous workforce in Web3 that have backgrounds of all types that you could possibly imagine. So for starters, Web3 kind of strips away this notion of like I'm different, and therefore I need to like take some action to fit in. And then also, and I've said this, and maybe it's a little bit disparaging to the space, but I also think it's important. Web3 is very young. It's a very immature industry. And you have brilliant people working very hard and doing amazing things. But that doesn't take away from the fact that there's still just a lot of people that are new to their careers and are kind of missing just what I would call leadership or operational discipline and what have you. And so all of a sudden, your experience in the military becomes highly impactful in a management position, even if you're content agnostic. If you don't know, the content, you do know how to lead a team. You do know how to work with people of, international backgrounds or different backgrounds, and so you can apply that here in a way that's super impactful. And also, lastly, I would say it is a very ambiguous, very fast moving space. And a lot of things that are done here have not been done before, and there's a lot of just figure it out. And contrary to, I think, the myth of the veteran or of the service person, um, that being like sort of the robot that needs orders to be followed and everything's got to be very prescriptive. If that veteran exists, I've never met them. Veterans are uniquely capable of dealing with things breaking, things going wrong, priorities shifting, the rules changing, et cetera, et cetera. And that's kind of just comes with the nascent stage of this industry.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many important points you made there, Jason. Like, for example, Ethereum is less than 10 years old. So there's nobody in the world who's got more than 10 years of experience in Ethereum. Like, so you're already starting at the starting point. You're coming to the industry with a number of skills that nobody can teach. And the other thing I like is that most of what we do in Web3 is open source. So if you, it really, it's up to you to control how quickly your technical acumen gets up to speed, because it's there. You just got to spend the time and passion and get up to speed. But you bring with you all those experiences. I mean, those are so many amazing points that you really unpacked. So we talked about the staking economy that we were both geeking out about, getting super excited about. Are there other verticals within Web3 as you look out on the frontier that excite you?
I think, and I was just talking about this, I think there's this idea of, I think I described it earlier as this homogenization of financial services. An example of this would be, payment infrastructure in a place like Africa. There's areas of the world where their banking and financial systems are, decades behind, what you would have in a quote unquote developed economy. And Web3 has, and decentralized finance has this sort of amazing potential to leapfrog those areas and those populations from 1980s banking infrastructure to 2023 in one shot. And so you see that in the form of payments, of cross-border payments. Um, there's really interesting projects that are happening everywhere around. As a trader, access to pricing of things like, let's talk about commodities. This is not a small deal thing. If you look in rural India, which is a highly agrarian economy, there is no broad access to the value of the things that you grow, and there's no easy access to actually, even if you had the data, to actually achieve that price for the sale of your commodity. And there are projects right now that I've talked to that are looking to solve that problem, which is a very tactical, tangible problem that is being solved by a very tech forward solution. So I think, you know web it's sort of a pretty grandiose thing to say, but I think that decentralized finance in Web3 really has the potential to just sort of level the playing field across a variety of different economies and population groups that right now are all over the map in terms of how advantaged they are with access to financial technology.
That's awesome. Uh, Jason, are you guys hiring right now?
Well, we're not hiring, but we are taking on interns, and we have one that's starting who's transitioning out of a tier one unit in the Army. I'll leave you to figure out what unit that is, but he is retiring after 20 years and coming on board, and that is a program that we would like to perpetuate. So we would like to use, where we are in our growth arc, which is unfortunately not able to hire, but definitely able to give people responsibilities and experience that hopefully springboard them into the industry. So that's where our focus is right now, from a talent perspective, if you will.
Were you able to do that through the Skills Bridge program?
No, he was somebody that one of our advisors actually just reached out, that knew and kind of reached out to
Awesome.
us directly.
Oh, that's just really cool. Any last thoughts today, Jason?
Well, I would say to folks, and I guess it's sort of top of mind just because we're talking about our intern who's retiring. Anybody that's coming out of the military, you are young. and this is an odd thing for me to say, but I think a lot of times, and myself included, when you come out, you find yourself the oldest person in the room a lot because you're just in a peer group that is earlier in their career. But play the long game. There is you have plenty of years to close whatever gap it is that you're perceiving, and your experiences in the military are going to springboard you past a lot of those peers that you may feel a bit behind when you initially transition out. So I think if people just play the long game and focus on what they're passionate about, and don't forget the things that you learned in the military, but really actively try to apply them to your business life, it will serve you very, very well.
Those are some great thoughts. A last question: how can people connect with you?
Well, you can visit our website, which is just methodic.capital.com. My email, if you want to reach me, is just my first name, Jason at methodic.capital.com. And you can find us on LinkedIn and Twitter as well if you're more in tune with the social media outlets. That's I'm not a hard person to find. I'm happy to talk to anybody out there that wants to chat.
Hey, thanks, Jason. Really appreciate you coming on today. Best of luck with the launch of Methodic Capital. We're all pulling for you. We hope you're going to be successful, and we're certain that you will be. And also wanted to thank our sponsor, Luca. For those of you who are interested in learning more about veterans and digital assets, please connect with us on LinkedIn and Twitter as well. And always reach out to me if you need anything. Perkins CR 97 on Twitter. Thanks again, Jason.
Thank you, Chris. Really appreciate it.